So welcome, everybody. We are delighted to have such a distinguished set of panelists here. And I'll let Ronaldo Menezes, professor at the University of Exeter, introduce our event. Thank you, Ronaldo.
Thank you, Aline, and thank you, everybody. So good afternoon, everyone. And morning, evening, wherever you are. And thank you for joining us in this panel entitled Towards the More Harmonious and Resilient Human Settlements. Before we dive into the discussion, I'd like to thank, of course, the Institute for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence, the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, and the University of Exeter for organizing this panel and giving me the opportunity to actually moderate the discussion. So I'm Ronaldo Menezes, as Aline said. I'm a professor of data network science here at the University of Exeter, where my research focuses on complex systems, human mobility, and urban environments. My work explores how data and network science can be applied to real-world challenges, such as reducing inequalities, improving city resilience, and understanding human behavior within networked systems. Over the years, I developed innovative models to analyze human mobility patterns, social influence, and urban dynamics, aiming to uncover insights that can help shape more sustainable and equitable urban systems worldwide. So human settlements, right? So as we know them today, have profoundly impacted natural ecosystems, for altering river courses to narrowing their banks and eliminating forests and wetlands. Our cities and towns have fundamentally reshaped the environment we live in. For centuries, we relied on infrastructure like dams, dikes, and barriers to protect ourselves from natural disasters. However, global warming has destabilized this approach. We've seen this in the southern Brazil, where devastating floods in Rio Grande do Sul have recently been on the news. At the same time, forest fires are spreading across the country as we speak, and projections suggest that the Amazon rainforest could lose up to 50% of its cover by 2070. A chilling prospect given the role of this ecosystem in global climate regulation. Moreover, global warming has accelerated, and we are rapidly approaching the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold that was set as a goal by the Paris Agreement much earlier than expected. Some recent references to the so-called hot models have argued that we might be seeing 3 to 5 degrees Celsius rise in temperatures by 2100. These shifts in climate primarily impact urban populations, where the majority of the people live. In fact, 50% of the world live in urban areas, and this number is even higher in Europe at around 75%, and Brazil at 86% of the people living in cities. Those cities, being concentrated areas of human activity, are particularly vulnerable to extreme weather events, making the conversation about resilience and sustainability in urban planning more pressing than ever. So they will introduce themselves in a bit. We are very fortunate to have a distinguished a set of experts today. Dr. Ricardo, who can raise his hand, Ricardo Safra de Campos, senior lecturer in human geography at the University of Exeter. We have Dr. Marina Hirota, associate professor of meteorology at the Federal University of Santa Catarina. Dr. Tiago Melo Cartacho, senior lecturer in environmental law at the University of Exeter, and Dr. Marcia Zilli, postdoctoral research at the University of Oxford. As scientists, we have a crucial role to play in addressing the world challenges. Our research not only helps to deepen our understanding of how human settlements interact with the natural world, but it also provides the evidence needed to inform policymakers and guide smarter decision-making. We have the responsibility to work closely with governments and institutions to ensure that planning and policies are based on the latest data and scientific knowledge. Furthermore, our role extends to educating the public, raising awareness about the importance of resilience and sustainability in urban development, and empowering communities to be part of the solution. By bridging the gap between science and society, we can promote changes that make cities more harmonious with nature and better prepare for future climate changes. Now, as for the agenda, I will call each panelist by name, and they will have around 5 to 8 minutes to share their research, their interest, and the reason for being the interest in this panel. And afterwards, I will pose some questions to each of them. After that, I will open the floor to the audience for anyone who has questions, and then we will have concluding remarks at the end. Just so housekeeping here. So this event is being recorded, as you probably heard. And if you're not comfortable having your cell phone camera, because this will be posted on social media, so you can turn your camera off. But I ask you to please remain muted until the end of the event when I open the floor for questions. So without further ado, I'd like to start with Dr. Ricardo Safra de Campos. Ricardo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Renato. I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully my slides are visible. And again, thanks for the opportunity to be part of this panel. Before I actually start my presentation, I just wanted to bring to your attention that there has been a number of media outlets reporting on climate change, displacement, mobility, and a crisis that is essentially upon us across the global south particularly, but also we would understand that some of these impacts are likely to affect individuals living in parts of the global north as well. So today I am going to briefly talk about climate change, precarity, displacement, and mobility. And this is based on research I have done over the last 12 years in South Asia, but also in parts of Africa, West and East, and South America as well. Just to bring to attention migration and displacement trends, what we see currently is a upward trajectory in terms of numbers of migrants worldwide. There is emphasis on international migration, so movement across borders. But what we do understand from modeling exercises is that environmental stresses, including climate change, are likely to displace people internally within borders of country. And you can see in panel D, hazard types, which have been displacing individuals over a number of years, and these displacements are likely to increase in frequency and intensity because of climate change. Some of the materials I'll be presenting are based on empirical research conducted with members of my group. These papers are all open access and hopefully can be shared with those interested in learning a little bit more about our research. Climate mobility, I thought it was important to bring to attention that this is a term which has been extensively used within the climate migration research community, because it does really capture a spectrum of population movements which take place associated with climate change or environmental stresses, but predominantly really the trend which we have seen over the years is that people tend to move because of economic factors, employment, education, and family obligations. But what we can see is that there is a lot of movements which have not been really unearthed by research. And I think the term mobility really does encompasses the complexity of responses that people might deploy to respond to environmental stresses. Mobilities, there is a research agenda really to understand mobility as a feature of everyday life, and therefore should be a cornerstone of development policy. In many ways, individuals tend to use mobility in a translocal manner, so multiple livelihoods in different places. There are intersecting social factors influencing mobility as well, which should be explored by the research community, policy, and practitioners. But really, it's important to understand that these movements do tend to take place over short distances and in the context of in-country mobility, as opposed to the scapegoat that sometimes we see in media outlets. There's these idea of migrants moving internationally, really across oceans, predominantly from global south to global north. This doesn't really necessarily happen because migration is a relatively expensive endeavor. So people don't necessarily really have either the financial resources or the social networks to deploy international migration. Why it's important to look at this mobility and displacement in destination areas within the global south. So some inputs from research conducted in Chattogram, the second largest city of Bangladesh, a place which has been urbanizing very rapidly and which is also a key destination for migrants. I'm not going to go over the statistical results, but rather I want to bring to your attention the fact that migrants moving into urban settlements are exposed to conditions of precarity. In many ways, our research has found out that these migrants actually living in urban settlements between 6 and 10 years have reported lower levels of subjective well-being and higher levels of exposure to precarity compared to those who have recently arrived. And the main reason is that those migrants who are moving into these rapidly urbanizing urban centers tend to really cluster in high-risk areas. And this is due to a variety of constraints, mostly to do with their financial capacity to pay for rent, or really to be part of the formal sector of the economy. Therefore, they are excluded from opportunities for upward social mobility. In this context, it's important to understand that these informal urban settlements remain in conditions of precarity, quite often really exposed to a wide range of environmental stresses, rapid flooding, landslides, urban heat waves, which tends to lower objective measurements of human security. And then important to also reflect on planned relocation, which is a very top-down approach deployed by countries, which essentially really move people out of harm's way. Communities from locations of higher exposure into areas of lower risk exposure. So these movements are likely to happen more broadly. It may well be the case, such as in Bangladesh, as you will see in the next slide. This is within, it covers the whole country, which is exposed to a number of different environmental stresses. But as I was just reflecting on, it may well be the case in parts of Brazil, particularly in the south, which obviously, as we would know, has been exposed to tragic floods. So entire communities having to be relocated to areas where they will be safe, which obviously put increasing strains in the provision of public services by state or municipal authorities. So really important to reflect on what planned relocation might represent for communities in the future. So our research really identified 6 phases of planned relocation that go from awareness raising, just informing individuals and communities of their levels of exposure to environmental risks, all the way through to a phase 6, where post-planned relocation processes such as monitoring, evaluation, and accountability should be performed by those institutions, agencies, or governments responsible for designing and implementing planned relocation. And that's where we see potential, for example, for artificial intelligence to support governments in kind of really taking a wider snapshot of those communities that are being relocated in terms of their needs, in terms of mechanisms for complaint, and in terms of monitoring post-relocation processes. And just to conclude my presentation, just bringing to attention 3 key aspects of climate change, displacement, precarity, and climate change. First of which is to really make cities safe and welcoming to migrants in terms of provisions of frontline services, basic health, sanitation, access to schools and formal sectors of economy. Plan for relocation, which is likely to increase in the number of events in places which are very highly exposed to environmental stresses, and potentially really facilitate mechanisms for international and domestic migration. So I will park here and be happy to take questions after my colleagues have completed their presentations. Thank you, Ronaldo.
Thank you, Ricardo. Fascinating. So thanks for the presentation. So I'd like to go next with Marina Hirota, Dr. Marina Hirota. Can you try to share your screen, please? There you go. Thank you very much.
Okay, so good morning for some, good afternoon for the others. It's a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate the invitation from Aline and also Ronaldo as our host and questioner today. So I'm going to present to you today some things related to how the climate is changing and how this triggers extreme events and potentially tipping points. So it's all a chain of events that maybe precedes what Ricardo just showed us, right? So I'm going to start with a chart that maybe most of you already saw. And the question is how global temperature is changing and how we are evolving. So for me, this is clear that as Ronaldo said in the beginning, our target temperature is 1.5 degrees here, and we are getting close to there. But for me, what is really highlighted in this chart that probably is not really seen for many that I talked about is that there is a linear trend here. I'm going to change this to laser. So a kind of linear, like a little bit bumpy linear, but it's increasing. And suddenly in 2023, there is like a higher bump, meaning that something is changing in the dynamics of the system as a whole. The Earth system is changing, the climate system is changing, and it's changing as a whole. So this behavior here can start happening with like subsystems of the Earth system as a result of this increase in global temperature. So it's destabilized, and we at some point cannot really predict, or it becomes unpredictable. And this for planning and for restoring socio-ecological system can be really damaging. So one thing that is really important in the Earth system, but maybe everybody knows that, but we don't really realize that, is that there are no geographic and political boundaries. So everything is interconnected. And one thing that happens in one corner of the planet can affect other places on Earth that maybe we have no idea about. So this is more or less what I'm going to show you today. So first, one example here is 23. Remember in the first chart that I showed that global temperature in 2023 with a different behavior compared to the linear increase. So what we see here is a shift in sea surface temperature. So it's here June till May 2023, 2024, and we see a difference in the warmth over the oceans in the planet. So we see here 22, 23 mean, the line, and 2015, 2016 in here. So 2 years that we had like a warming in the Pacific and in the Atlantic. And then we see 23, 24 here. And this, for me, when I saw this, I got really desperate a little bit, because the linear, or the trend here that we see, and the huge difference that we have from the historical mean, is terrifying. Just because the oceans, they drive a lot of changes in the Earth system, because we are covered mostly by oceans in the planet. So what we saw as a result of this is extreme events throughout the world. We saw in South Africa very recently heavy snowfall. We saw in 2023 an extreme drought in the Amazon as a whole. And we saw in Southeast Asia very recently, like a lot of floods, and floods are expected, but not as much as we have seen. And the Sahara has lakes now, and this recalls like 6,000 years ago, when we have evidence the Sahara was a bit greener in the western part due to the monsoon systems. Then we had the Brazilian floods in southern Brazil, in Rio Grande do Sul, and it was massive and a lot of damage. So we have seen in other parts of the world other things, but what is really, for me, related is how this sea surface temperature increases are like some sort of warning of it's coming throughout the year in regards of extreme events. So when we think about this thing, and a result of this could be like migration in the longer run, as Ricardo was showing, but also in the short term, we have thousands of fires, and not only the Amazon, but the Brazil as a whole is burning, South America is burning, and this is Friday, August 13th. So it's like massive, and people are suffering, and I'm suffering in my eyes here from the smoke plume that is coming from northern Brazil and is reaching us in southern Brazil. So people in terms of respiratory diseases, in terms of their eyes, so it's itching and it's really red. So we have inflammations and stuff here, and people are really realizing how we are all interconnected at the moment here in Brazil. And apart from that, we also have, like in the Amazon, particularly, like massive droughts and massive river banks exposed. And then as a result, we have also like less oxygen in the waters, and then we don't have like fish anymore for people. So in terms of food security for this particular region of South America is really, really important. And we don't have transportation. So if you think about a very important highway in your country, or in the city you live, an important avenue, this is the same as blocking it for months. Can you imagine how things will come and go and reach remote places in terms of food, health, and of course water, and good water for consumption? So this is really affecting populations in South America at the moment, and I'm highlighting this because I'm here. But not only this, as a result, we can have like this dynamics of change really accelerating in unpredictable ways. So this brings us to what people call the tipping points, or what are the tipping points, right? So how and when we could cross these tipping points. And one example of this are these tipping elements of the Earth system. So each one of these tipping elements could be crossed depending on global warming temperature thresholds. So if you see here, the West Antarctica ice sheet, that for me, when I was doing my PhD, was massively like untouchable, is now touchable due to global warming, and in a temperature like lower than 20 degrees Celsius. So if we think about this, and also the boreal permafrost that stores a lot of carbon, the Greenland ice sheets, and this ice coverage that are also very important to maintain the climate all over the planet stable, because they reflect sunlight and they avoid us to get more energy and increase our temperature in different parts of the world. So we see the Amazon rainforest in South America, the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation that is really key to stabilize climate all over the Northern Atlantic mainly, and especially the UK, I would say, and Scandinavia. We see like coral reefs, and then all of this could cross thresholds, and because of a tipping behavior could change faster and unpredictable, and in an unpredictable way. So if we think about this, is already very alarming for me, but also the tipping elements are very much interconnected. So the Amazon dieback or the Amazon changes could impact Antarctica, Western Antarctica ice sheet, could impact this part of the planet here in Asia, and then other parts of the world are also interconnected, as you can see in this diagram. So this means that if you have like a tipping behavior here in the Amazon, this could really well affect other parts of the world and accelerate changes in other parts of the world. Not only accelerate, but also weaken these changes. But it depends on how you see it. It's bad or good, but it depends on the context. So it's all interconnected, and the results of this and the impacts could be really damaging for everyone. So when we think about this tipping behavior, what do you mean by this? It's a domino effect. And this kind of behavior dynamics is driven mostly by what we call feedback mechanisms. So one click that you have in a system, it could be either one of these systems or all of the systems I showed here for you today. But if you click on one of them, so if you deforest a forest, or if you have fires in the forest, you have forest mortality, this decreases the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere, decreases rainfall, and then decreases forests. So this is how this loop of interactions reinforces the first perturbation I put in the system. And this is why the dynamics becomes faster and self-reinforcing. So even if we stop disturbing, these changes will continue in a very non-linear way. So for me, it's not shown yet in terms of like, we don't have scientific evidence, but 2023 for me and 2024 are already years where we see this non-linear behavior. It's out of the linear trends. And this means that things can get worse and worse because we cannot control it anymore. We cannot control the actions to really decrease it, but we have to do this anyways. In any case, it's really hard now to predict what we have in the future. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. So yeah, so quite concerning there. So let's move on to Tiago Melo Cartacho. Dr. Tiago, if you like to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Ronaldo. Thank you so much to the Institute for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Just to let you know, I'm a lawyer, so it's a very different perspective, but still extremely concerned and worried about what's happening in the world. And what I'd like to bring you here would be like a very, very short, brief presentation or talk on what I and some colleagues more recently call adaptive law for resilient human settlements. I don't bring a presentation. In fact, I have some slides, if that's okay, that I could share in the middle of my presentation, but I don't bring a whole presentation. First of all, well, as I was saying, my work has been in the areas of environmental rights, sustainable cities, and more recently on these adaptive legal mechanisms for resilience, because many people, most of the people, if they think of law, certainly most of you, or perhaps all of you, have already noticed that sometimes it's difficult for law to accompany change, and that's a terrible challenge for environmental lawyers and climate lawyers, because clearly law usually tries to set some provisions that intend to predict the future, but we're human beings. They are made by humans, and we're not wizards. The legislator is not wizard. We can try to predict some possibilities, but what is happening today is that sometimes it's very difficult to do it. So thinking of human settlements, clearly we have been seeing the increase of lots of the population in cities, mostly the mega cities. I think at the moment there are more than 40 in the world. These are cities with more than 10 million people. Well, I'm Portuguese, and the population in Portugal is exactly 10 million. So it's for this reality, it's incredible how, for example, city planners and city managers can take decisions when you have so many people within the same in the same place, and especially within the borders of a place that is not a territory, that is not as broad as a country. So clearly we have mega cities, but we also need to address climate problems in smaller cities. But obviously those larger settlements are the ones that clearly create even more problems. And law can help with this. When you are trying to serve or trying to manage millions of people in a very small place, certainly you need infrastructures, you need transport, you need housing, and this affects the environment, and it certainly affects, will have effects and consequences in the state of the climate. And that's the reason why it's important to mention the relevance of planning and regulation, specifically regulation, not exactly law, because regulation is the local regulation is the one that can make the difference. And here, regulation in human settlements needs to address the vulnerabilities to disasters, the threats from environmental harms and conditions, the inadequate blue and green, or the green and blue infrastructure, and the vulnerabilities to climate change. But as an example, we could mention neighborhoods that have contaminated lands, pollution, urban heat, few trees, few parks, flooding risk, poor disaster preparedness, old and poor quality housing, and poverty and underinvestment. And this is not only, let me say, this is not only a problem that we find in the global south. We can find this in lots of other countries all over the world. And I have a colleague, I've been working with a colleague in the United States where we can find lots of these issues as well. And let me also mention the social aspects. As a lawyer, I clearly need to address that as well, because if we combine these problems with other issues that we can find in cities, such as discrimination, inequalities and poverty, harms to nature, oppression and subjugation, racism. Clearly, we will find the reality that we have been, I usually work in, which is environmental justice and just resilience. So everything is combined here. So to finish and to conclude, my suggestion, together with some colleagues in law, is finding an option which is not only solution, but it's something that can contribute together with other legal mechanisms, which is adaptive law. And it would be understood as a set of conceptual tools and institutional characteristics that facilitate the adaptation of complex social, ecological, institutional systems to the disturbances such as climate change. And I just wanted to share this slide with you to show differences between what we call the maladaptive legal systems. Those there are which systemic goals are narrow. They have a monocentric structure, which is unimodal. It uses single uniform modules and solutions as solutions to problems. It is fragmented. It has inflexive methods, and it is very rational, linear, legal centralist, and it doesn't address the problems of climate change clearly. If we think of adding these adaptive legal systems with a multiplicity of articulated goals, some systems that can be, or mechanisms that can be polycentric, multimodal, with participatory solutions, with adaptive methods that are not only about command and control, but they use standards, they use flexibility, discretion up to a certain, and I can explain it a bit later in the discussion, but a discretion up to for the agencies, the ones who want, the people who understand what we are doing and what we are trying to address, and trying to focus on the feedback loops, taking decisions, adopting legislation, and trying to understand, and regulation, and trying to understand what the results are. And this, I finish here, but I would like to link this to AI and also to big data. When we think of cities, there's a lot of data in cities and human settlements. We have our phones, but there are sensors that we can find all over human settlements, or that could be investment to also establish them and install them. But clearly, this would, having sensors and sensorizing the city or the human settlements, would certainly improve decision making, regulation making as well, because if we have data, if we can treat it with criteria clearly, and this needs to be regulated as well, you will have the right information to take decisions, better decisions, and adapt in a better way. So clearly, adaptive law is not the solution, capital letters, the solution, but we need to combine it with other kinds of legal mechanisms, such as command and control, market-based mechanisms, or even community governance, including public participation. And here, the participation of people is extremely important. And I finish for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiago. So I'm sure I personally can be talking to you a lot about the availability of data, but I'll leave this for another time. So let's go our last panelist introduction here. So it's Dr. Marcia Zilli. So Marcia is to you. Let me know if you have any problems.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Marcia Zilli. I am a postdoc at the University of Oxford. So now I will share my screen with you guys. Just a second. I hope you can see my screen. So I will talk a little bit more. But my area of study is the climate change and the impacts of climate change over precipitation in Brazil specifically. And I'm mostly interested in extreme events, both during the transition from the dry to the wet season and during the wet season. So what I'm going to be presenting here is a little bit of an overview of extreme precipitation and extreme climate events in the world and in South Brazil specifically, or in Brazil. I focus this a little bit more on South Brazil, but I also study other parts of the country. So started with an overview of what happened in 2024 so far. So Marina gave a very nice overview of a lot of events that we had here, and I'm focusing more specifically in floods. So according to the UN, we had about 225 disasters caused by natural causes, and out of this, 95 were floods or flash floods just in the year 2024. And they affected more than 20 million people worldwide. And I'm thinking of things, for example, I live in the UK. We have massive floods in the beginning of this year. Also, of course, in South Brazil, we had the impressive flood in Rio Grande do Sul. This image always shocks me to see the city center flooded this way. And then we had things like in Kenya, where a large part of the country was also flooded during the long rains at the beginning of this year. In Iran, where it's mostly dry, we had massive floods also this year. In Bangladesh, for example, and so on. And this makes us always wonder, are these events becoming more frequent or more intense? How can we answer this question? So I will start by a more theoretical explanation, let's say. If we look at this curve, this is the distribution of our present climate. So most of the time, we are in this part of the curve that we call normal. So that's what the type of weather in terms of precipitation, the amount of precipitation, the rainfall that usually happens in our day-to-day life. And eventually, we have what we call extreme events, which are usually on the tails or on the sides of this curve. This could be either dry, so very low precipitation, or a large sequence of days without any rainfall, or it can be wet, so massive amounts of rainfall that will cause floods and landslides and all these things, and they can happen as an isolated day or as a sequence of days. When we heat up the climate, when we change the climate, what happens is two things, as it's represented by this red curve. The first one is that we increase the average, so this curve is shifted to the right, which means that what it was a normal temperature today will be, the normal temperature in a warmer climate will be higher than the normal temperature today. The same thing can happen with precipitation. The average precipitation in one day in the future can be larger than in the present. But more importantly than that is that we kind of squish this curve. So if you see this curve is larger. This is what we call an increase in the variability of the weather. So in one hand, we have, for example, on the dry side, we tend to have more dry days, for example, or more days with the relative humidity below an average or below the certain level. And on the right-hand side, which is more common, what happens, for example, over South Brazil, we have more wet days, and we can see this in two perspectives. If you look at this dashed gray line, we have a certain frequency of these events. So for this event, that is happening in this rare event is larger. And then we have over this part here of the curve where we have events that in the past were considered extreme. Nowadays, they become more frequent. So what we can take home with this theoretical framework is that we are having more events of both wet and dry weather. And if we look at how the understanding of these extreme events is according to the latest IPCC report, this is a very busy map, and I'm going to focus only on extreme precipitation and in areas where we have a good level of certainty that these extreme events are already increasing. So we are observing this increase in events. We see this happening, for example, here in Europe, in different parts of Europe. We see it happening in Eastern USA. We see it happening over South Asia, so India, Bangladesh. We see also over Southern Africa. And we see here over Southeastern South America, where the Rio Grande do Sul is. And I'm going to focus on this specific area of Southeastern South America in a minute. So basically what these trends are showing is that our extreme events are becoming more frequent and more extreme. And there's a high confidence that these changes are caused by humans. So there's a human contribution to that. And this is the case here in South Brazil. So this map here on the right is showing what's going to happen in the future. If we consider a 2-degree warming, which we are not very far from, as Marina also showed, there's a lot of confidence. So these areas where we don't see the hatching is areas where we have confidence among the models that we're going to have an increase of about 20 to 30% in the intensity of these extreme precipitation events. And this graphic here now is showing on the y-axis, we have the months of the year. So the top is January all the way down to December. And the the x-axis is time since the 60s up until the future 2100. And when we see the green is where we see an increase in extreme events. And where we see the browns is where we have a decrease in extreme events. So this graphic is actually very interesting because it shows that these extremes will happen in a different way in different times of the year, specifically over this area of Southeastern South America. And I want to highlight 2 interesting things here. If we see, for example, the browns here, they are located mostly in the months of August and September. And this indicates that probably we're going to have a delay on the on the onset of the rainiest season. And this is especially what's happening over eastern part of Brazil, where instead of the precipitation for the summer starting in, let's say, September or October, it's starting in November. And this has severe consequences, for example, as we are seeing now with the dry weather, with very intense heat waves during this time of the year. And the other thing that this graphic is showing here for the Southeastern South America is an increase in extreme events, for example, in April and May, and also in the summer season. So I thought it was quite interesting that it's pointing out that maybe extreme events like those that happened this past year in Rio Grande do Sul might become more frequent in the future. And this is a little bit of how I study this. Me and my research group here, we study this event. We are interested in cloud band events, which are this massive organization of precipitation in the form of large clouds that can cover a lot of the Southeastern South America and Brazil. And it happens over Rio Grande do Sul, and they are more common actually over Eastern Brazil, where we call the South Atlantic Conversion Zone. But they can also happen over South Brazil, like, for example, very intense cold fronts will form this massive cloud band events. And we identify this, as I was mentioning before, the blue shades here indicate the fraction of days in the year or in the summer season, so from November to March, where I have more events. So they tend to occur more frequently over Eastern Brazil and the Amazon, but they also occur in South Brazil. So over South Brazil, they occur on average of 20 days per season. So about 10% of the days of the season in South Brazil, we have like a cold front or a massive cloud band event that can cause precipitation. And they contribute to about 50% of the times that we have intense precipitation. It's because of these cloud band events. If we look at how these cloud band events are related, how very intense cloud band events are related to intense precipitation, we can classify this in the most extreme events, and they may happen 1 to 5 days per season and cause about 10% of the total precipitation. So it's the total precipitation that happens from November through March, let's say, that could be maybe 1,000 millimeters happening, 10% of that, so 100 or more millimeters happening in just one day. And that's a lot of rain. And if we look at what happens in the future, so this graphic here on the right is showing how much these cloud band events are changing in the future. So the black line here is indicating that in general, cloud bands events are becoming less frequent in the future. But the bars here are showing the increase in those events that are considered extreme. So I'll focus only on the blue bars here, which are the events related to extreme precipitation. These events are becoming more frequent. So what this is saying is that future changes might in the future, these massive cloud band events that cause extreme precipitation over southeastern Brazil will become more frequent. They might happen from 6 to 9 times per month, which is almost a 3 times increase based on what we have now. So just like a final remark, a wrap up of what I've said, we do have observations indicating that we had an increase in the intensity and frequency of extreme events of precipitation over South America and including Rio Grande do Sul. And this is models indicate that this is related to human causes, so it's human-related climate change. And the climate models are also indicating that these events might become more persistent. Intense events might become more frequent in the future, especially during the summer and autumn. And event-based evaluations like the one I just showed, they can be a good way for us to understand what causes these extreme events and what to expect of these extreme events in the future. And that's what I had to show for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcia, and thanks everybody. So I'm a little bit conscious of time here. I don't want to hold people too long. So I'm going to change a little bit the order of things. So I'm going to open for questions of the audience if anybody has any questions at this point or comments that I'd like to come in. If not, then I'll ask a question. So you can raise your hand, I guess, electronically or write the question. Well, if not, so I'll start. Of course, there are many issues here that we can address, but I would take the liberty to start with Tiago here, because when we talk, I mean, at least for me, as a layperson in law, it seems to affect most of us, right? Because we all under some legal system, independent of where we are. So, Tiago, my question to you, and the other panelists can come in as they wish, is you talk about this adaptive legal system, right? And I had this question about how environmental law can evolve actually to help us actually deal with the problems. But I'd like to bring also the issue, because you put together in your talk other issues such as racism and discrimination, etc. Right. So in many countries like Brazil, at least on paper, we have a legal system that people cannot be a candidate, for instance, if they actually have committed a crime, right? But we don't seem to take the same view from the point of view of environmental crimes, right? So I want your view on this, right? From the point of view of education of the people who are electing, the people who actually make decisions, make laws, and can the legal system actually evolve enough to encompass all of those aspects? So I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Ronaldo. I'll try to be brief on that. Certainly, from my perspective, a crime is a crime. So if it's the same if it's a crime against people or against nature. If the law provides that a certain action or a lack of it, or non-action is a crime, it should serve for the same purposes. But let me also say, just to try to complement that, because this should be something that should start from international law, and we still see, and now we're having a new COP. And we still see that international law in the areas of climate change still is very much soft law, even if we have a convention. So certainly and absolutely, states should be bolder and should try to make to make provisions more effective and stricter for the states who have to comply with that, who have to implement it to make it effective as well in their national jurisdictions. And then we would add the adaptive law at local level, where we should set those, I would say, those strong boundaries, those strong limits, but within that, it should be easier for local communities to participate and local governments to make sure that they get the information and take the decisions that needs to be taken. Obviously, there are issues related to corruption, to economic interests that need to be sorted as well. But certainly, this combination of command and control and more adaptability within a certain limit, it's the only option, it's the only solution to tackle problems of a world that is changing so much at a so fast pace. And the criminal aspect, but we have ecocide. We're discussing ecocides in lots of arenas, and still is a problem, and still countries don't want to address it.
Thank you, Thiago. It's fascinating. I mean, that's at least to me. So, does anybody want to comment on this? Because I see this issue of laws. I mean, and forgive me if I'm again not informed as like a more like a top-down approach, but we can also see the bottom-up approach, right? So people are making individual choices. So I wonder, for instance, what's the view of Marina in terms of, I mean, if laws are in place, can we actually stop the tipping points? If Ricardo wants to comment on the mobility issue here and the rights of people to move. Does anybody want to come in? There's a question on the chat, but I'll let if anyone wants to come in at this point.
I can just comment on that, because there's a huge conversation about the illegalities, particular in the Amazon countries and in the Amazon rainforest or the system. And most of deforestation, for instance, is driven by illegal activities. And so if we have solutions regarding the legal system and how to really have actions, and command and control is one of them, and it's been restored here in Brazil now and trying to be updated as well, because we need an update. But if we have this type of things going on together with the other actions we have from different scientists, I think this could be really good for the Amazon case for sure, because we could avoid deforestation in large scale, and compared to the, let's say, legal deforestation. But yeah, I think this would be super nice. That's just a comment.
Thank you. So Ricardo, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Ronaldo. Very briefly, because I think it is associated with law, is the aspect of climate justice, I think, which in and of itself is a challenging to conceptualize. But I think particularly associated with displacement, mobility, and plan relocation. I think there's a justice issue with plan relocation and associated with human rights, not least because individuals who are being forced to relocate or are being relocated by governments are the ones that have been damaging or emitting CO2 in the atmosphere the least. And also, I think there's issues around how narrowly defined human rights are in law. And I'm sure Thiago could comment on this as well. But I think because climate change, impacts are likely to really increase in the next few years. So to what extent mechanisms which are in place and which will have to be developed, i.e. further plan relocation, will have to take into account human rights and the aspect of accountability of those institutions who are then effectively designing and implementing such adaptation or response mechanisms.
Thank you. So we have a couple of questions in the chat. I'm going to read here. There's a question from Seema that has to do with my interpretation of who's the culprit here. But it basically says, she's saying, at what scale do the disaster events we are discussing here correlate with the extent of damage caused, right? So she's saying it is mainly large-scale damage from major corporations, or is it a combination of smaller scale contributions, like from those individual farmers? So, and then maybe I don't know if Marcia wants to come in and then talk about this or Marina. So anyone can answer that question?
Well, I can start perhaps. I think the idea is that in terms of impacts, I think you have like the large scale hazard, and then depending on where you are, the exposure you have, you're going to feel the impacts more or less. So this is top down. But if you think about how the smaller scales versus larger scales producers or farmers could affect climate, for sure it depends on the size of land use change you were performing. So I would say that I think your question is regarding the impacts. So I would say it depends very much on two things, according to the IPCC framework on risks. And then the other panelists could correct me and complement if they feel like, but you do have like the exposure importance. So if you're closer to a river or not, if you're closer to a place that can have landslides, and also the vulnerability of the communities. So the farmers, the small farmers versus large scale farmers. For sure, the smaller farmers are more vulnerable to that because of a variety of factors, such as the money they have to recover, for instance, or how they are prepared to receive such a damage, things like that. So I would say that the lower or the lower income or the smaller the farmer, the worse. But in general, of course, we cannot generalize everything, but in general.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree. Sorry, sorry. I agree with Marina that if you think about the impact caused, that's probably more related to larger like larger scale production than in smaller scale. But definitely thinking about vulnerability and resilience, probably the people that has less resilience and more vulnerability are the small individual farmers, and those are the ones that are also taking the blunt of these extreme events. So they are the ones that are more suffering than actually causing it.
Thank you both. There is a question that I'm going to try to rephrase here to Ricardo, because I think I can include some other issues related to mobility, Ricardo, and that is my bias on interest in mobility as well, I suppose. So the question I think is related to if there are any data or any studies done in mobility of businesses, right? As part of environmental changes, and they working on a paper, I suppose, at the Rio Grande do Sul. There's a question from Alina Flores. I'd like to include here the issue also that I mean, because it seems to me from the discussions on all of you that we are the culprits of this, right? So we human beings. So if we, for instance, start actually moving people, let's just, for example, right? So if we invert the trend of urbanization and we go back to rural areas, are we now going to destroy the areas that we are going to, right? So for instance, right now we are in cities and we are destroying things. So if we start moving back to rural areas or wherever, as we spread ourselves more, is this going to be better or is it going to be worse? Right. And in fact, I'd like to at some point bring this as a comment, I guess, Mars, in terms of does this change the environmental conditions? Could this change the tipping points? I suppose, Marina. So I will leave it to you, Ricardo. So if that makes sense, what I'm asking.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ronaldo, and thanks, Alina. Very happy to have this conversation over email as well. Please do write to me. I think one critical aspect of that displacement and relocation is what is fairly common in the USA, called managed retreat. And essentially, it really is the governments moving people and infrastructure, which in many cases really have significant impact on businesses. And as part of managed retreat, one of the mechanisms governments in the US are deploying is buyout schemes, where obviously they're paying for people to relocate and paying for businesses to relocate. But these has a number of implications, I think, for the way in which we kind of continue to plan our cities. Buyout schemes in low-lying coastal areas in Florida, for example. So you have governments buying out people, and then corporations and businesses coming in and buying land at a much lower cost. So there's aspects around gentrification, for example, of extensive areas of parts of the USA. This is likely to obviously also happen in other parts of the world, perhaps happening in Brazil or in Porto Alegre as one of the impacts of the floodings. But yeah, so how governments would have, again, really talking about human rights, social justice, the mechanism is in place to guarantee that people and communities being relocated are not going to bear the blunt, really, of these schemes such as buyouts or really retreating entire communities. I think I read somewhere that there is ideas of a new Marshall Plan in Brazil, where basically they will shut down entire cities and build back in safer locations. So what are the kind of impacts that these communities, who will benefit the most? I think this is what I'm trying to say, from these events, and to what extent businesses as well are being impacted and may or may not be benefiting from these retreats and relocations. But great question. Very happy to talk about with you, Alina, further on. Thank you. Thanks, Renato.
Thanks, Ricardo. Does anybody else want to come in terms of the mobility and the changes that this could have into accelerating TV points, or even the environmental conditions? Marcia, I'm looking here. I mean, I don't know a lot about I'm trying to remember here, this South Atlantic convergence zone that you talked about, right? But is this changing as well as part of urbanization? Because I saw your charts. And how is this convergence zone different than it was? Like, I don't know, we probably didn't have equipment to measure, but 100 years ago, I mean, how is it different at this point?
Yeah, so the South Atlantic conversion zone, sorry, I think I passed through this quite briefly in my presentation. So this is something that happens very commonly in Brazil during the summer. And if we watch the weather forecast in the news, we always see them talking about how we might have this event. And it's kind of like it's a cloud band that happens usually over Southeast Brazil, and then can last about 4 days. And usually it's related to very intense precipitations and natural disasters. So just to mention a few, 2011 in Teresópolis was a South Atlantic conversion zone that remained stationary there for a while. Last year in São Sebastião was also related to a South Atlantic conversion zone, the landslides there. A lot of floods in São Paulo and also on the Paraíba Valley between São Paulo and Rio are also caused by the conversion zone. It's hard to say that this is that urbanization would have an impact on that, because this is more related to to regional circulation, so to the regional aspects of the winds and the atmosphere over Brazil that form this environment that is actually enabling the very intense precipitation over these locations. But it definitely has an impact on how we think of our cities, especially because what we are seeing in the future is that these events might become more rare in the future, so they might happen fewer times, but when they happen, they will bring much more precipitation. Because like global warming will increase the amount of water vapor you have in the atmosphere. And if you increase the amount of water vapor, you can increase the intensity of these events. So that's definitely something that we should take into account. And just to also briefly mention that, on the other hand, these conversion zones and cloud bands, they are really important to really cause the precipitation and the total rainfall that we need over eastern Brazil. So in years where we don't have enough of those, we tend to have droughts like happened in 2014 and 15. So it's kind of like thinking of the other side of that distribution curve, that if we don't have enough events and we don't have enough precipitation, we might have severe droughts and heat waves in the cities as well.
Thank you, everyone. So I'm really conscious of time. I mean, because we ask for your time for 1 hour. So I'm going to ask some final thoughts. And I hate to be controversial, but I'm going to ask something because, again, I'm listening to this, trying to be moderated, but it's scary, right? And as I hear you talk and I see these slides, I mean, I just get more and more concerned. So my question to you as experts in this, and I'm going to start, I suppose, with Tiago, if that's okay. I mean, is there hope, right? So I mean, can we be hopeful? Where can we find hope for reversing what we see and all the disasters that we see every day? I mean, and you can now, of course, do from your angle, from the legal system, right? And then I will go to everyone and final words on that.
Well, it's not easy, right? Well, I like to think that we're doing this work exactly for some reason. Clearly, I believe that from a legal perspective, there's a lot to do from an international law perspective. But we also know that there are many states that are more focused on some other things than climate. And certainly wars don't help this in this argument, but I really believe that we have lots of examples of local governments and even national governments that are trying to do their job. And I really believe that the role of local governments, together with local communities and other stakeholders, those are the ones that can make the difference, because those are the ones that effectively can change things. I never forget. Just to finish, I'll never forget the moment when President Donald Trump, some years ago, announced that the U.S. Were leaving the Paris Agreement. Some minutes later, the mayor of New York just said, well, the United States may be leaving the Paris Agreement, but our city is not leaving the Paris Agreement. I think this can give us a big lesson. Sometimes the power is not exactly on those who rule the world. It can be on people, on their local government and local communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tiago. Thanks for the participation. Let me go to Marcia. Marcia, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with the colleague also that I think a lot of the change should come from bottom up and probably will come from bottom up. But also, I think I do have some hope that we can reduce a little bit the impacts that we are having as a society in general, because if you look at how we got so far with the UN and COP and all these agreements, or Paris Agreement that we have nowadays, it's a very large level of mobilization across so many different countries. It might not be perfect. It might need more teeth, as other people say, or it might need more organization and more contribution from large players on these agreements. But those maybe smaller players in terms of population, smaller players in terms of pollution, they are the ones that are suffering the most, and they are the ones that are really interested in adapting and reverting, or at least slowing down the climate change. So I really believe that with a little bit more of effort, we can go a little bit further on reducing at least a little bit the speed with which we are changing the climate. And I agree that a lot of the change in terms of adaptation, in terms of resilience, will come from local communities, from local governments, understanding their needs, the needs of their community, and trying to do these changes in a more just way also. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Martha. I'm going to go to Marina. She has to leave in a few minutes. Marina, do you have any final words for us before you leave, or maybe she already left?
Yeah, I think I would just say, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I thank you, Ronaldo, and I'm sorry you have to leave, but just I think as a final remark, I would say that this meeting here for me is some sort of it gives me hope that we can reach the like integration we need, you know, because it's not my normal my comfort zone. So I'm out of my comfort zone here. And I'm really glad to be here because then I learn from the others and I think about other solutions that could be put on the table. And there's a question regarding, as scientists, what can we do? I think what we can do is keep working, but also being more open to talk about numbers, about what makes them think about the situation. And we need to disconstruct or reconstruct means to really reach politicians and other stakeholders and policymakers and these people, because our results are not reaching them properly. So this is the way I see it, and being here makes me really think about other ways of really communicating scientific findings. So I really appreciate being here, and I'm super open to talk to anyone who has ideas for solutions and for actions that could make an impact on this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. So, and I know that you have to leave, so feel free to disconnect. And I'm sorry that it took longer than we planned. So, and Ricardo, final words for you.
Sure, thanks, Ronaldo, and thanks all colleagues for the insightful contributions. I think from a perspective of mobility displacement, I mean, all of these points that we've mentioned previously are relevant, but particularly in places which are exposed to all of these environmental hazards and stresses. I think urban planning and policy need to reach beyond kind of income housing to also include retraining of skills, access to education, labor markets, security, social networks, things that really connect people to places. People might have to be relocated. They might be taking up migration mobility as a response to the environmental stresses. So urban development policies could be focusing on development of structures, services, and industries, but also recognize needs and requirements of new urban populations, migrants or relocated communities, who themselves are very differentiated and are impacted by precarity in completely different ways as well. Also to do with age, gender, ethnicity, and other intersectional aspects as well. And I think there's an opportunity for AI, big data, and both you, Ronaldo, and Thiago mentioned to support urban planning policies. And I think some places I know through experiences with the C40 mayors migration council as well, they are starting to really kind of make use of those technologies to support planning for future climate change. And then thanks again for the opportunity to participate in this conversation this afternoon.
Well, thanks everyone, and I appreciate the people who joined in to listen to our conversation. It is definitely a multifaceted problem that hopefully Aline and the Institute and UHUGS and the University of Exeter can continue to actually lead the way and trying to do more discussions about this. I mean, there are so many aspects that 1 hour does not allow us to touch. For instance, the issue of perhaps misinformation, and which it has to do with education. And just a final point, I heard this morning something that I got completely shocked, that almost everyone that during the misinformation time during COVID that profit out of that got elected, right? As in various countries, right? So people who spread that misinformation. I heard today about URGS, not about URGS, but about Rio Grande do Sul, that there is a misinformation going on that the flood was due to a satellite that is controlled by the powers to be and controls the weather, right? And therefore they and if the population believes those things that we ourselves here, I mean, we are privileged to say, oh, this is definitely a joke, but some people don't think it is, right? And so I think there is, I guess, a space for more discussion, and I will end here and pass it on to Aline, who hopefully will organize more of these events. And again, I appreciate everybody coming. I appreciate the panelists, and I appreciate Aline the opportunity to actually try to moderate this. Thank you.
So on behalf of the Institute of Data Science and Artificial Intelligence at the University of Exeter, I would like to thank Ronaldo Menezes for moderating, Ricardo Safra de Campos, Marcia Zilli, Thiago de Mello Cartacho, and Marina Hirota as panelists for this important discussion. And there will be other discussions coming up, so keep an eye out for this channel. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining in. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.